Welcome to our session on how to be culturally aware for international success.
We will talk about the main cultural characteristics around the world, which problems can arise when dealing with multiculturalism and how to solve them, and how to build trust with your first contact overseas.
I'm really excited to do this session with Eva. Eva founded Genuine Translations in 2014. Eva and her team help businesses thrive in other cultures by removing all linguistic and cultural barriers, from localizing their website to translating product labels and export documentations in up to 30 languages. So Eva, how did you first get into working internationally?
Well, from an early age, I was really interested in other cultures. I met students from all over the world in both the Spanish and English universities where I studied translation and management, including my Nigerian husband. And working in the translation field, I also get to work with translators and clients from all over the world. One of my first experiences working internationally was interpreting for South American refugees in London at doctor appointments.
That's such a great variety of people that you've met through your work.
Yes, luckily. Right, and it's a real honor doing this presentation with you, Janina. Janina is the founder and director of Janina Neumann Design, and she creates brand identities for businesses who are marketing to the UK and German-speaking countries. This includes bilingual design and branding to interface design and graphics. So Janina, how did you first get into working internationally?
So in 2017, I started working ad hoc on bilingual marketing material for a diagnostic company based in the UK, but that had German clients. And then after visiting Medica in Germany, I was inspired to put my language and cultural perspective to use and actually create a dedicated bilingual design service for my clients.
So today we will be looking at what being culturally aware means and the importance of being culturally aware in business. We'll look at the main characteristics of cultures around the world, and we'll give you some tips for working effectively across cultures. We'll share 5 common misunderstandings when trading internationally, and also how to build trust with your first contact abroad. Please bear in mind that part of this presentation is based on our own personal experiences having worked with other cultures, and there are always country and personality differences on top of the cultural ones. Also, please feel free to send us any questions or share any examples and experiences of cultural differences by email, and we'll answer them as soon as possible.
So what does it mean to be culturally aware? Well, sometimes we actually don't know that we're living in this bubble, and the way we've been brought up actually influences how we experience things. So a great example I find is this story that involves fish. So do these beautiful koi fish understand that they're swimming in water? So David Foster Wallace told a great story that I think illustrates this point beautifully. There are these 2 young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way, who nods at them and says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And the other 2 young fish swim on for a bit, and then eventually one of them looks at the other and goes,
"What the hell is water?"
So I think this is a beautiful example about, how we're influenced by culture, and we sometimes don't even know that the way we see things or how we respond to emails or conversations because how we've been brought up. Because we're talking about cultures and about how to communicate, the reason I chose this beautiful image of koi fish is because in Japan it's actually a symbol of friendship, and I thought that was very suiting. Mm-hmm. So being culturally aware means understanding that you have a perspective lens. So it's almost, if you think about the ideas that you create, it's actually based on the language that you speak and how you can express yourself, and just being aware of your cultural bubble. But of course, there are sometimes differences between personalities and that can also influence how people interact with each other. So I think Erin Meyer beautifully summarizes this by saying it is not a question of culture or personality, but a culture and personality.
So why is it important to be culturally aware in business? We thought the following case studies would be the best way to answer this. The first one is about Tesco on Liverpool Street in London. They positioned these crisps under their Ramadan banner in 2015. As you know, many Muslims don't eat in the day during Ramadan and they avoid pork products. Although these Pringles don't contain pork, only have the flavoring, you will agree that it was completely offensive to Muslims. And of course, Tesco was forced to remove them following a wave of criticism on Twitter, and they obviously had to apologize as well. And the second case study is from Walmart and its failure in Germany. So when Walmart expanded to Germany in 1997, 1998, it lost hundreds of millions of dollars due to a lack of cultural awareness and preparation. For example, employees were asked to participate in a morning exercise chanting Walmart, 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 which in the US can be seen as an act of boosting morale and inspiring loyalty, but the Germans found it rather annoying. They were also forced to spy on co-workers and reporting any misconduct, which again may seem normal in the US, but not acceptable in Germany, because that's what they used to do at war and also during the post-war. The American Walmart also ignored the employees' feedback, which is key in the German deciding process, as we'll see later. This created frustration and inefficiency among employees, and also at the shops, the stalls were placed in a way that made customers spend more time shopping, and they didn't consider the fact that Germans don't like spending time at the supermarket because they are really efficient. And finally, the cashiers were asked to smile, but for Germans, it's not considered normal to smile at complete strangers. So the cashier's smiles didn't seem sincere.
It's a great example of cultural misunderstandings. So now we'll explore the main characteristics of cultures around the world. So we'll focus on the Mediterranean Europe, Eastern and Northern Europe, Asia, the Middle East, Africa, North America, and South America. And the way we would like to do this is to take the 8 cultural scales by the fantastic Erin Meyer, who researched and outlined these scales. So they start with communicating, evaluating, persuading, leading, deciding, trusting, disagreeing, and scheduling. And we'll give you an insight into each of the different scales as we go through the countries.
So we'll start with Mediterranean Europe. The countries on top are only a representation of the area. It doesn't mean that this content applies just to those countries. So when they communicate in Mediterranean Europe, the communication is less precise, there's less repetition, and not as many recaps as in the UK or America, for example. When they are evaluating, they are direct and blunt with negative feedback. When they are persuading, they put theory before facts and conclusions. And the way you learn at school has an impact on how you present your information and persuade others. When it comes to leading, status is important, and you can usually jump levels to communicate with the bosses because it's very hierarchical. In terms of deciding, they are top-down, so there's usually one person who makes the decision on behalf of the team. And when it comes to trusting, they have long meals usually because they are relationship-based. And when they are disagreeing, they are confrontational. The French, for example, love the debate. But that doesn't mean it's going to harm the relationship. So it's looked at something that's actually good. When it comes to scheduling, they are flexible and adaptability is key. It's usually okay to be 5 or 10 minutes late. So an example of my experience with the way Mediterraneans gain trust, for example, on one occasion I did a translation project for a friend of a friend in Spain. Now I'm very British when it comes to business and try to separate business from personal. So the fact that the client was a friend of a friend didn't stop me from asking for part of the payment upfront, as I do with first-time clients. The client was a bit offended, and although the project went ahead and the client was happy with it, I wonder if I should have built a relationship with that client directly a little bit more before, in order to gain trust. So that's an example of how Mediterranean people gain trust.
So now look at Eastern and Northern Europe. So their communication style is usually quite low context, which means that they are direct in how they communicate. The evaluating process is quite direct, with negative feedback given, without fluffing things up, so to speak. Persuading, Germany and Russia are principle-based, so theory comes first. The Netherlands, Denmark and Sweden are application first based, so it's find a lot more case studies in their marketing material, for example. Leading, is quite egalitarian, but Russia and Poland have hierarchical structures. Deciding is consensual apart from Russia, and trusting is quite task-based apart from Russia, and disagreeing is confrontational apart from Sweden, and scheduling is linear time-based apart from Russia. So that means a task is completed before starting the next, and there are no interruptions. So for example, in Germany, you might find that contracts take a lot longer to put together, but after everything's agreed, then the process is quite efficient because everyone knows what they're doing. And also what's quite interesting in Germany is that Germany's economy is led by the Mittelstand, which is a tier of small to medium-sized family businesses. And they hold these values, these family business values, quite highly. And it's quite interesting how that developed, because in the decades following 1945, when the German economy thrived from the rebuild of its war-torn country, and undervalued Deutsche Mark actually helped family businesses to grow through exports, as explained by George Blaha, researcher at Stiftung Familienunternehmen.
Right, so we move on to Asia. When it comes to communicating, they are high context cultures, which means the communication is sophisticated, nuanced, and layered. Messages are spoken and read between the lines. They are implied, but not plainly expressed. The Chinese are taught as kids to read the air, which means not just hearing explicit words, but also focusing on how something is said, and also focusing on what it isn't said. They also won't interrupt a meeting to give their opinion unless they are asked to in advance. When they are evaluating, positive messages are used to rub negative ones. They use downgraders often, such as sort of, slightly, and the criticism is given only in private. Persuading is they follow a holistic approach, so they always think of the broader implications of their actions. When it comes to leading, subordinates use hybrid names or titles for their leaders. They shake hands in descending hierarchical order when entering a meeting room, especially in China. And they have seating arrangements for dinners according to the guests' rankings. And getting this wrong can mean not making it to the next meeting or not closing the deal. With deciding, they are top-down, except Japan. In Japan, they've got a Japanese ringi system, what they call ringi system, which means it is hierarchical but ultra-consensual. So low-level managers discuss a new idea among themselves and come to a consensus before presenting it to managers one level higher. And they even use a proposal document and software for this. When it comes to trusting, in China, long non-business lunches and dinners are the norm, especially before negotiations. In Japan and across East Asia, a substantial amount of drinking with customers and collaborators is quite common in the trust building process because it shows you have nothing to hide. And in India, if you don't develop a personal relationship with them, they will always say everything is okay, even if it's not. So it's quite important to build that relationship first. When it comes to disagreeing, the Chinese, Korean, and Japanese preserve group harmony, and protecting another person's face is more important than stating what you believe is correct. And with scheduling, they are flexible time.
So, in the Middle East, it's important to understand that it's made out of countries that are actually influenced by different religions and cultural roots. And it's important to research these before engaging with someone abroad, as insensitivity towards these religions and cultural roots could really negatively influence your business opportunities. So we'll start with communicating. It's high context and sophisticated. So it's more like a read between the lines conversation that you might have. And evaluating is indirect negative feedback, except Israel. Leading is hierarchical, except Israel. And trusting is relationship-based. And what's really interesting is with the disagreeing, there's actually, because they're relationship-based, they actually avoid confrontational, except Israel. So things might be explained over time, more in a private setting. And scheduling time is flexible time. So an Arab will say, I will see you before 1 hour or after 2 days. And it's always an approximation rather than a direct time, which you might want to think about how you set out your day, because if you have a flight to catch, then you sometimes do need to know when this meeting will happen. And also due to religion, the calendar may vary according to the Middle Eastern country. So it's advised to check when the working days are. So an example of how this applies to business in real life, I recently met an Israeli lawyer, and he said that, during conversation, he made a statement. He said Israeli managers were bad managers. And I was interested by the statement and asked him what he meant by that. And he said that Israeli managers are often perceived as, so to speak, bad managers, because in Israel there is a flat hierarchy and people treat each other as friends in an organization. So I found that really interesting. And this is also to highlight, if you find something peculiar or different, something that you weren't expecting, reach out to that person and I just ask them why they communicate in that style, because that's also how you build friendships, because you start to understand each other more.
Okay, so Africa. The way they communicate is high context, so it's quite important to use who you know as well. And when they are evaluating, they tend to give indirect negative feedback. When they are leading, they follow a hierarchical process, especially in Nigeria. When it comes to deciding, they are top-down, so one person makes the decision on behalf of the team. With trusting, they are relationship-based, and sometimes, well, quite often the relationship is your contract and your insurance, so you have to make sure you build that relationship beforehand. When it comes to disagreeing, they also avoid confrontation, like the Asian. With scheduling, they are flexible time. So Africans will say, I'm coming now, and that second now makes all the difference.
Okay, so we'll go on to North America. The reason I've also included, Australia and UK is because they're quite similar in how they interact. So communicating, they use they're actually the lowest context method. So they reply quickly to emails, even if it's to say that they'll come back within 2 to 3 days. Evaluating is indirect negative feedback. For example, Americans give negative feedback with positive language. So this might be wrapped up like a cheerleader, like 3 positives and 1 negatives. And downgraders are also often used. So that means they will say sort of, slightly, to communicate their discontent. But that can obviously be confusing for cultures like the French and the Dutch, who are actually very direct when they give negative feedback. And we'll go on to persuading. So they're applications first based, and this means that they will use case studies to illustrate how they work. Leading is egalitarian, and they decide top down. So in the large majority of countries, being egalitarian correlates with value and consensus for decision making. And actually the US breaks the mold, and the person in charge makes a decision quickly on behalf of the group for efficiency. However, their decision is flexible and can be changed until they made their final decision. And trusting is highly task-based. So if you complete a number of tasks on time, you're seen as trusted. Disagreeing is confrontational, and scheduling is linear time.
Okay, and last but not least, South America. So the way they communicate is high context. When they are evaluating, they give indirect and very diplomatic negative feedback, usually in private as well. When it comes to persuading, they follow a principles first process. With leading, they are hierarchical. Trusting, they are relationship based, so long meals again. And disagreeing, they avoid confrontation. And with scheduling, they are flexible time. Also, just to mention, when they are disagreeing, disagreement and debate are negative for the team or the organization. And open confrontation is inappropriate, and it will break group harmony or negatively impact the relationship. So similar to the Asian cultures. And an example, I will always remember a Mexican colleague I worked with who will never disagree with our boss when we all did in our team. And now I understand she was preserving group harmony. So we are gonna move on to sharing some tips to work effectively with multicultural teams. So listen to the meaning, not just the words, and listen to the body language. Ask for clarification, for example, use open-ended questions. Don't form opinions too quickly. Laugh at yourself when you get too frustrated. Set protocols up front.
And then it's really important not to mimic a confrontational or direct negative feedback style that's not yours, because you're likely to not get the nuances right and start offending them. Use low context and positive language and downgraders. Understand and adapt to one another's behaviors. So picking up how they communicate, not mimicking them, but just understanding them on a different level, so to speak, put on your other cultural perspective lens. Be patient and just make the most of a culturally diverse team, because it's been researched that it leads to innovation, and it certainly leads to creativity within the workplace.
So the top 5 common misunderstandings when trading internationally, basically things that usually go wrong. The first one, we've highlighted is greeting someone for the first time. In Nigeria, for example, they take bows when greeting the elders, and when they leave as well the room. It's all about respecting the elders in Nigeria. Never use first names, even outside a professional environment. They use sir, madam.
And in Germany, the way the language is structured, there are two ways of addressing someone, either in a formal or informal manner. So it's advised to always go with the formal manner of greeting someone, because if you address them informally, there's this kind of anxiety that that other person might feel if you haven't asked them if you can address them in an informal manner. But also remember that German people compartmentalize, so they separate business from personal life. So they see it as normal to always be speaking in a formal manner. And in Israel, addressing someone informally is actually really important. So they actually might say, hello, my brother and sister, or sister, which is completely different in, for example, Germany.
When it comes to staying in touch, in China, they give someone a card with 2 hands, and they love business cards, so you will get plenty of those.
And in Germany, it's important to actually highlight your qualifications and titles, for example, an email signature and your business card, so they understand what level you are in the organization and what credibility you bring to the project. So before a meeting in Germany, business people will be very well prepared. So they will have thoroughly researched your company's products and services before any meeting. So I really advise you to also prepare prepare by researching their company and services just as thoroughly, because a German person might then think that you're not interested just because you haven't researched them to the extent they have.
Mm-hmm. And in Spain, it's generally accepted to be 5-10 minutes late for a meeting, and they don't necessarily advise in advance if they are going to be late. But having said that, always try to be punctual, just in case. So this point is about etymology, which is the study of the origin and history of words, or a study of this type relating to one particular word. I guess what we are trying to say here is never assume that everyone will understand you in English, even if they speak it. If you aren't using translators and interpreters, at least use global English, which is basically English with shorter sentences, no nuances, no ambiguity, no idioms. However, if you are selling a product or service overseas, I strongly recommend you to use a good translator or interpreter so that your brand and reputation aren't damaged.
Yeah, I can certainly relate to that. For example, also idioms can be an effective way to actually market to an audience, because you're integrating your brand into their culture and you show that you understand their needs and values, which is so important when you reach out to your prospective audience. Okay, so now we'll go on to dress code. So the dress code can vary from industry to industry, even in the same country. And sometimes certain industries find it important to highlight personality through clothing more than others. So it's always important to perhaps have a contact who could give you that information, or ask Eva and myself what's common in that country. Or if you're going to an event, perhaps email the event organizer to just clarify the dress code.
So how can you build trust with your first contact abroad? As a summary, in Africa, South America, Mediterranean countries, Asia, and Middle East, use who you know to establish the relationship if you can, or build that relationship slowly through befriending, socializing, sharing common interests, visiting them in person instead of emailing them or calling them. And in the UK, Northern and Eastern Europe, and North America, show diligence, meet deadlines, reply promptly to emails, and you will gain their trust. How can I help you? Research shows that 70% of consumers won't buy your products if your website is not in their language. A good translation will get your message and branding understood and valued, and you will be able to engage with your audience as you should anyway. I can help you translating and localizing your website or marketing material, and doing any telephone or face-to-face interpreting, managing multilingual Amazon accounts if you have any, and translating your product labels or any export, legal and technical documentation. I can offer you a free 30-minute follow-up call to discuss your requirements, and we can create a translation plan together.
Okay, so how can I help you? So if you are looking to export to Germany, Austria and Switzerland, I can help you build a strong market position in those countries. One thing to remember is when you are creating your marketing plan and strategies, just remember that you are using your English perspective. And sometimes if you don't know the other culture, it's difficult to change that English perspective lens with, for example, a German perspective lens when you generate ideas. And that's when I can help you. So I'd like to offer you a free 30-minute follow-up call on some ideas that you have on how to start exploring Germany, Austria or Switzerland. Or if you're currently not in those areas and you'd like to come to the UK, then I also can help you with that. And if you already have a German website, I can audit it for you and highlight some areas that you might want to reconsider and make your messaging stronger. So thank you so much for listening. As we said earlier, please feel free to email us any questions, comments or experiences you've had with working with different cultures, as we'd always like to learn about different cultures ourselves, and we wish you all the best. Thank you very much.
Thank you.